There is a car sitting in a private collection right now, insured for more money than most people will earn in their entire lifetime. And the man who built it was told to destroy it, not sell it, not store it, destroy it, take a torch to it, and pretend it never existed. That is not the plot of a movie. That is the actual company policy Jaguar had for its experimental prototypes in 1960, and one engineer quietly ignored the order. If he had followed the rules like everyone else, the car you're about to see would not exist, and neither would half the legends I'm about to tell you about. Because that is the real, uncomfortable truth about Jaguar. The cars everyone remembers, the D-Type, the E-Type, the ones plastered on posters and phone cases, they are only half the story. The other half is a graveyard of machines that were faster, wilder, more beautiful, and in some cases more important than anything the company actually sold. Cars that got canceled 2 weeks before launch. Cars that got crushed in accidents and quietly rebuilt in secret. Cars that got rejected by Jaguar itself, only to reappear years later wearing someone else's badge. Stick around, because by the end of this list, you're going to look at brands like Aston Martin and Lexus completely differently. And there is one entry near the end so absurd, so genuinely insane, that I promise you will not believe Jaguar actually built it and then just walked away from it. And before you click away thinking this is just another list of concept cars gathering dust in a museum somewhere, understand this. Every single car on this list was real. Real engines, real chassis, real test drivers who put their lives on the line behind the wheel. These were not sketches on paper. These were machines that existed, that ran, that in some cases were faster than anything the public was ever allowed to buy. Let's get into it. We start in 1960 with a car that has no proper name, just a code, E2O, and it might be the most important Jaguar that almost nobody has heard of. Picture the gap between the legendary D-Type racer and the E-Type that would define an entire decade of sports car design. Somebody had to build the bridge between those two cars, and E2A was that bridge. It still carried the racing DNA of the D-Type in its bones, but underneath the skin it was secretly testing the independent rear suspension and the monocoque construction that would make the E-Type possible a year later. Under the bonnet sat an experimental 3-liter straight six with fuel injection, pushing close to 300 horsepower, which for 1960 was an outrageous number. American racing legend Briggs Cunningham borrowed the car and took it to Le Mans that same year, and it showed real pace before engine trouble ended its race early. Here is where it gets dark. When the car came home from America, Jaguar's plan was simple. Scrap it. That was standard procedure for experimental prototypes once they had done their job. E2A only survived because a former test driver's family quietly kept it hidden away for decades, tucked out of sight, protected from a company that wanted it gone. When it finally resurfaced and went to auction in 2008, it sold for close to $5 million. Read that again. A car that was scheduled for the crusher ended up worth $5 million simply because one family refused to let it die. And that right there tells you everything about what is coming next on this list. Because if the least famous car on this countdown is worth $5 million, just wait until you see what almost never existed after it. Next up is a car that a lot of serious collectors will tell you, with a completely straight face, is the most beautiful Jaguar ever built, which is a strange thing to say about a car the public was never even allowed to see. This is the XJ13, and it was Jaguar's secret weapon aimed squarely at Le Mans. A mid-engine prototype built around a 5-liter quad-cam V12, producing somewhere around 500 horsepower, years before any road-going Jaguar would ever get a V12 engine at all. The body came from Malcolm Sayer, the same aerodynamicist who shaped the D-Type and the E-Type, and it shows in every single line. Every curve on this car looks like it was drawn by the wind itself, rather than a human hand. In 1967, test driver David Hobbs took the XJ13 around the banked circuit at Mira at over 161 miles per hour, setting a British closed-circuit lap record that stood for decades afterward. This car was fast enough and beautiful enough to genuinely challenge Ferrari and Ford on the world stage. And then everything just stopped. Rule changes at Le Mans capped engine sizes right out from under it. Jaguar got swallowed up into the mess of what would eventually become British Leyland, and the XJ13 got shoved into a corner and forgotten. But the story gets worse before it gets better. In 1971, during filming for a promotional film about Jaguar's new V12 E-Type, a tire let go on that same high-speed banking, and the XJ13 was destroyed in a massive, violent crash. Legendary test driver Norman Dewis walked away from the wreckage, which is honestly a miracle in itself, and the car was later painstakingly rebuilt piece by piece. Today, the XJ13 exists as a one-of-one, a race car that in the end never actually raced, and it is worth an estimated 8 figures. Think about that for a second. 8 figures for a car that was almost lost forever in a fireball on a test track, for a race it never officially competed in, wearing a body shaped by a man who designed aircraft before he ever touched a car. And we are only 2 cars into this list. Coming up next is what happens when a newspaper, of all things, decides to build its own dream car. In 1967, the Daily Telegraph magazine set out to answer one simple question: what would the ultimate luxury grand tourer actually look like if money was no object? So they took a Jaguar E-Type 2+2, shipped it off to the Bertone design studio in Italy, and handed the pencil to a young designer named Marcello Gandini, the very same man who would go on to shape the Lamborghini Countach, one of the most iconic supercars ever created. The result was called the Piranha, a sharp, low, wedge-shaped coupe sitting on full E-Type running gear with the 4.2-liter straight 6 mounted up front. It debuted at the Earl's Court Motor Show in London, and it absolutely stopped traffic, pulling enormous crowds who had never seen anything like it wearing a Jaguar badge. For its era, the interior was outrageously advanced, with tinted glass, a radio that could actually record audio, and full air conditioning. But here's the part that turns this from an interesting one-off into something genuinely wild. Go look up a photo of the Piranha, then go look up a photo of the Lamborghini Espada. Gandini clearly kept his own homework and reused it. The Piranha itself stayed a one-off show car and never went further, but its shape went on to directly influence one of the most famous Italian grand tours of that entire era. In other words, a cancelled experimental Jaguar quietly helped design a Lamborghini, and almost nobody realizes it to this day. Think about how strange that actually is. A car that never made it past a single show stand in London somehow shaped the silhouette of one of the most desirable Italian grand tourers of the entire decade. And it did it from the shadows, with no credit, no fanfare, and no badge to prove it. That pattern of cancelled Jaguars secretly shaping other legendary cars is going to keep showing up again and again on this list. And honestly, it might be the single most fascinating thread running through this entire story. So keep that idea in the back of your mind, because it comes back in a much bigger way in just a moment. Next up is the Pininfarina XJ Spider, a car that tried to answer a question Jaguar fans had been quietly asking since 1975. Where did the raw spirit of the E-Type actually go? When the XJs launched, a lot of longtime fans felt like Jaguar had traded pure beauty for cruise liner comfort, and the Italian design house Pininfarina agreed with them completely. So they built their own vision of what a modern Jaguar sports car should be, using XJ's VI-12 mechanicals as the base. The XJ Spider was a fully functional roadster with a long, elegant bonnet, an unmistakable oval grille opening, and proportions that deliberately echoed the E-Type without directly copying it. It appeared at the British Motor Show in 1978, and the public reaction was so overwhelming that Jaguar actually sat down and seriously studied putting it into production. But the company's finances in the late 70s had other plans. Jaguar was fighting for survival inside the chaos of British Leyland at the time, and there was simply no money available for an entirely new sports car, no matter how stunning it looked on the show stand. The Spider stayed a one-off, but keep that shape locked in your memory, because when the X-Kate finally arrived in 1996, almost 2 decades later, more than a few of its lines felt strangely, unmistakably familiar. Now we get to the biggest what-if in the entire modern history of Jaguar, and honestly, this is where the story gets almost tragic. This is the XJ41 Coupe and its convertible sibling, the XJ42. Inside the company, everyone simply called it the F-Type. This was meant to be the true direct successor to the E-Type, styled by designer Keith Helfet with actual input and personal blessing from Sir William Lyons, the founder of Jaguar himself, before he passed away. The plan was completely serious. A 4-liter straight 6 with twin turbos pushing around 330 horsepower, all-wheel drive in the top-spec versions, and performance figures aimed directly at Porsche. This was not some fantasy concept sketch. Running prototypes were actually built and tested on real roads. For most of the 1980s, this car genuinely was the future of Jaguar, and then, slowly, painfully, the project started eating itself alive. The car kept gaining weight with every revision, the launch date kept slipping further and further back. And by the time Ford bought Jaguar in 1989, the XJ41 was already years behind its original schedule. Ford's new management took one look at the numbers and killed the project outright in 1990. But here's the twist that most people never hear about. The design work did not simply vanish into a filing cabinet. It found its way to Tom Walkinshaw Racing, where a young designer named Ian Callum reworked those exact themes onto a completely different platform. And the car that eventually emerged from that reworking was the Aston Martin DB7. Sit with that for a second. The greatest Jaguar that was never actually made ended up quietly saving Aston Martin instead, giving that struggling brand one of the most beautiful Grand Tourers it has ever produced, built from the bones of a Jaguar that Ford's accountants decided was not worth finishing. That is not a rumor. That is not internet speculation. That is documented automotive history, confirmed by the very designers who worked on both cars, and it might be the single wildest fact on this entire list. If you thought that story was strange, wait until you hear what happened next. Because Jaguar was about to accidentally hand a rival luxury brand one of its most famous designs, and they did it completely on purpose. Next on the list is the Kensington. Ital Design's own attempt to show Jaguar exactly what its future flagship saloons could look like. Giorgetto Giugiaro, the legendary designer behind everything from the original Volkswagen Golf to the DeLorean, took a V12 Jaguar saloon platform and rebodied it into a smooth, modern four-door that debuted at the 1990 Geneva Motor Show. The Kensington was a fully running, fully functional car, and it was essentially Giugiaro pitching directly for a design contract. He genuinely believed Jaguar's styling had grown far too conservative and stale, and this car was his proof of exactly what was possible if they took a risk. The design kept classic Jaguar cues like the low wide grille and the swooping roofline, but wrapped all of it in clean, confident, early 90s surfacing that looked years ahead of its time. Jaguar, now newly owned by Ford, politely said thanks, but no thanks. But Giugiaro was never one to waste a good idea. He recycled several of the Kensington's design themes directly into a saloon he was working on for a completely different client. That car became the Lexus GS, which means somewhere out there in some strange alternate universe, your neighbor's Lexus could have been wearing a leaping Jaguar cat on its bonnet instead of 4 interlocking rings. Two completely different luxury brands, on two completely different continents, and one single rejected design quietly links them together forever. Coming up next is a car Jaguar, essentially built as a birthday present to itself. The XK180, to celebrate 50 years since the original XK120, stunned the entire automotive world back in 1948. Jaguar's special vehicle operations team took a modern XKR, dramatically shortened it, tore off the roof and the windscreen entirely, and turned the supercharged 4-liter V8 up to roughly 450 horsepower. The XK180 was a pure old-school speedster in every sense, with humps behind the seats, hand-formed aluminum bodywork, and almost nothing in the way of actual weather protection for the driver. It debuted at the Paris Motor Show in 1998, and the public response was immediate and intense. People did not just admire it, they genuinely wanted to buy it right there on the show floor. Only 2 examples were ever built, and both were fully functional, drivable machines. Jaguar insisted from day one that it was purely a celebration piece with absolutely no production plans whatsoever. But the sheer intensity of the reaction to the XK180 quietly convinced the company that real demand existed for a proper new sports car. Which leads us directly into the next entry on this list, and honestly, one of the most painful, most heartbreaking cancellations in the entire history of this brand. Next up is the car that broke enthusiasts' hearts not once but twice, the original F-Type concept. Unveiled at the Detroit Auto Show in January of 2000, this compact aluminum roadster was shaped by designer Keith Helfet, the exact same man behind the cancelled XJ41 a decade earlier, which technically makes this his second doomed F-Type in a row. Some designers get cursed projects. This man got a cursed name. The concept was small, light, and genuinely gorgeous, sitting much closer in overall size to a Porsche Boxster than to the much larger XK. And Jaguar did not play coy about it in the slightest. Executives openly discussed a real production run in front of journalists. Engineering work actually began behind the scenes, and the car was widely expected to be sitting in showrooms within just a few short years. Press reaction and public reaction were overwhelmingly, almost unanimously positive, and deposits were practically writing themselves. Then Ford's finances took a sudden, brutal turn for the worse. Budgets across the entire group got slashed without warning, and in 2002 this project was quietly, unceremoniously cancelled to protect investment in more mainstream, higher-volume models. Jaguar fans would end up waiting all the way until 2013 for an actual production F-Type to finally arrive. But look at the 2 cars side by side, the 2000 concept and the 2013 production car, and the family resemblance is completely impossible to miss. It took 13 years, 1 cancellation, 1 heartbroken designer, and a small mountain of broken promises from a company that could not afford to keep them. But this concept eventually won in the end anyway, proving that sometimes the best ideas simply refuse to stay dead. We are almost at the finish line now, and the next two entries are, without question, the strangest and the most jaw-dropping cars on this entire list. So if you have made it this far, do not go anywhere, because it genuinely only gets crazier from here. Continuing the streak of bold, unexpected ideas is probably the single strangest car on this entire countdown. The RD6, revealed at the Frankfurt Motor Show back in 2003. This was Jaguar attempting something the company had genuinely never tried before. A compact, aggressive, rear-wheel drive luxury hatchback aimed squarely at a much younger buyer. And the details on this thing were genuinely seriously clever. The entire body was aluminum. The rear doors were hinged at the back and swung open backwards, with absolutely no central pillar in the way, creating a wide-open coach-style entrance. And the whole tailgate swung open sideways, almost like something out of a futuristic Range Rover concept. Power came from a 2.7-liter twin-turbo diesel V6, making around 230 horsepower. Because this was the absolute peak of the European diesel performance era, and Jaguar leaned all the way into it without hesitation. Under Ian Callum's design direction, the RD6 was also a deliberate public statement of intent, a clear signal that Jaguar's entire design language was about to get dramatically more modern, more aggressive, more relevant. The production reality never actually materialized. When Jaguar did eventually enter the compact luxury segment, it arrived as the far more conventional X-Type and later as the XE Saloon. The RD6 stayed a pure show car, and honestly, nothing Jaguar has built since, not even the cars they actually put into showrooms, has ever looked quite this genuinely adventurous again. It remains to this day a strange little glimpse of a version of Jaguar that simply never got the chance to exist. And now, save for last, rounding out this entire list is the single most advanced Jaguar ever cancelled, and I promise you this one is going to sound completely fictional even though every word of it is real. The CX-75 unveiled at the 2010 Paris Motor Show to celebrate Jaguar's 75th anniversary. The original concept was pure, unfiltered science fiction made real. An electric hypercar powered by 4 separate electric motors, with 2 miniature gas turbine engines on board acting as range extenders. Jet engines inside a Jaguar, let that sink in for a moment. The public reaction was so intense, so overwhelmingly positive, that Jaguar actually committed to building it for real, partnering directly with the Williams Formula One team to make it happen. The eventual production version swapped out those tiny jet turbines for something almost equally insane, a 1.6-liter 4-cylinder engine that was somehow both turbocharged and supercharged at the same time, revving past 10,000 revolutions per minute, combined with electric motors to produce a combined total of around 850 horsepower. 5 working prototypes were actually built, and they worked. They genuinely hit true hypercar-level performance while running cleaner than most ordinary hatchbacks on the road. Then, at the very end of 2012, Jaguar suddenly pulled the plug entirely, pointing to the shaky global economic climate and a price tag that would have topped £1 million per car. The CX-75 never reached its planned run of 250 customers. It did get one small consolation prize, though, a starring role as the villain's car in the James Bond film Spectre, chasing an Aston Martin through the streets of Rome at high speed. Even on the big screen in a movie theater in front of millions of people around the world, a cancelled Jaguar still could not catch a single break. Forever destined to be remembered as the villain's car instead of the future flagship it was actually built to become. So there you have it. 10 genuinely rare, genuinely remarkable Jaguars that this company built with real engineering, real money, and real ambition, and then simply chose to walk away from. A prototype scheduled for the Crusher that ended up worth $5 million, a Le Mans racer that got destroyed in a fireball and rebuilt from the ashes, a cancelled sports car that quietly became an Aston Martin, a rejected saloon that turned into a Lexus, and a jet-powered hypercar that ended up chasing James Bond through Rome instead of sitting in customer driveways where it belonged. If you had to pick just one of these 10 cars to bring back from the dead and put into full production today, which one would it be? Let me know down in the comments, because I genuinely want to know. And if you enjoyed this one, make sure you're subscribed, because there are plenty more stories like this one still buried in this brand's history, just waiting to be told.